Well, thanks everyone. Thank you for that great introduction as well. Thank you. Like we said, my name's Jessica Shetler, and here with us are my colleagues, Renee and Mallory, and together we work together in a program called Girls Night Out, which we'll share a little bit about with you, but we also say that to let you know that that's sort of a framework that we're operating from when we talk about some of these services and supports. And so we'll tell you just a touch about that program and how we integrate some of these supports together in that group and how that functions. Our goals today, though, are that hopefully we can give you a little bit of understanding around current research and knowledge base related to gender differences in the expression of autism spectrum disorder, and also how to then apply some of that understanding to designing and implementing supports, especially related to promoting self-care and social relationships for young women with autism and other related disabilities. So hopefully we'll come away with giving you a little bit of an introduction and some familiarity with that, as well as some common supports that you can incorporate into your practice or encourage the providers that you're working with, other colleagues that you're working with, and supporting these young women that you know and care about in ways that are help them to succeed and achieve their goals in whatever that setting is. Because it sounds like we have folks from a variety of kind of practice backgrounds and settings that you're working in. So that's great. It's exciting to talk with all of you. So just to start in general, if we're going to talk about gender differences, and I do want to just give a little kind of an acknowledgement that when we talk about kind of gender differences and sex differences, that can mean kind of a variety of different things. In the context of what we're talking about here, we kind of acknowledge we're talking about it in kind of a binary way, sort of males and females, but understand that there's a wide range of expressions in terms of gender identity. But we also have a body of research around sort of those sex differences or those kind of biological and genetic differences that we're noticing in autism. Today, what we're going to mostly focus on are those more kind of social areas, the ways that gender is expressed. So we tend to use gender differences more in our conversation today. So in saying that, let's start off by thinking about, to talk about, unique services and support. It's important to acknowledge what might be different in general for people, regardless of having autism or not. So in sort of typically developing gender differences, we see that females often have a greater use of nonverbal communication. Female relationships and interactions tend to be more reliant on conversational skills and kind of emotional relating versus sort of a more characteristic of kind of male social competencies and social skills that are often more related to sort of activity-based kinds of connections and relationships. And for females, that relating component and that ability to have kind of empathy and connection and relating on a deeper level emotionally and conversationally is a key part of social relationships for a lot of women and for many women that we see. When we think about girls at a little bit younger end of the continuum, oftentimes we see that there's a little bit earlier imaginative and pretend play that's happening. And so it's just important to recognize that there are kind of overarching gender differences that are happening when we talk about kind of social competence and social communication. Oh, my slide's not, is that that? I think I'm a little frozen. I'll kind of continue. I'll just go on while we're moving on to the next slide. But when we think about kind of our social connections and connections in our kind of social world, another important piece to that is this kind of adaptive skill difference, and also an area where we see affected for a lot of individuals with developmental disabilities. So this kind of social communication or social competence piece is one area, but then also when we think about adaptive skills and potential areas for support, those are going to be different for males versus females as well. When we talk about things like managing your period or menstruation, things like understanding clothing in context, there's a much wider variety of clothing options, preferences, expectations for females in a variety of social situations. So that can be more complex for the young women we're supporting with autism or other developmental disabilities. Also, those elements of personal hygiene, things like skin care, hair care, again, just a wider diversity and complexity of kind of opportunities and ways of expressing oneself. And that also can be interpreted by others in those social situations. So in considering all of those things, I probably don't need to make the case to you all, but it's sort of our rationale for why it's so important for us to be focusing in and thinking about the unique needs of the young women that we're supporting and working with. So you think about those kind of typically, those differences in typically developing kind of groups of people or people with who are not don't identify with a disability. And then you think about the kind of inherent symptoms that go with having a developmental disability like autism that's going to affect both your social communication skills as well as your kind of that behavioral domain, adaptive skills, areas of interests, patterns of interaction and behavior. And we're getting pretty complex here and really thinking about how that's going to look and present itself. So as we're thinking about that and that unique expression for young women, there are some things that we want to point out to you that we know from the research so far that would be important as you're considering and encountering folks that you're working with. And we know most of you are probably not looking at this necessarily from a diagnostic lens, but I think when we think about, okay, what might we have typically associated would go with having autism, we want you to understand that that can often look different for young women and girls. So similarly to how our typically developing girls often show a higher degree of imaginative play or more nonverbal communication skills and having more of that conversational capacity or emphasis in those skill sets. For our young women and girls who are experiencing autism, those skills may look a little, those skills may be a little bit more well developed, or the differences in those skills may be more subtle. So we may see girls who have some of those initial nonverbals being able to be better or be more fluent with, using gestures or using eye contact, having perhaps a little bit more of a variety of facial expression. But what we hear from the girls and young women that we work with is that although those skills may be there, it's often very difficult to interpret and understand those cues and make sense of those cues. So a lot of our young women that we work with might say, well, I know I'm supposed to do this in this situation, but I'm not sure why. And that can be really complex for our young women to manage and to be able to work through in that situation where they've learned what's sort of expected and how to act in that situation, but that it's increasingly or can be quite overwhelming at times to really understand that. Another area that we see that can be different is in terms of thinking about that second area of autism, where we're talking about more restricted or repetitive patterns of behavior or interests. Sometimes for our young women or girls, those interests may not be so inherently or seem obviously different from what might be expected from a gender norm perspective. So some of our colleagues out of the United Kingdom have found that for girls, the sort of level of intense interest that may be experiencing, that intense passion or area that they're really, really interested in talking about or thinking about may not be so different from what we expect for girls typically. So things like animals or babies and dolls and young and sort of caregiving roles, those kinds of things might be an interest area, but the degree and intensity of that interest is so profound that it is still impacting their functioning in those kind of typically expected relationships. And so understanding that it's important to understand kind of the degree and depth of an interest or of a passion to understand how that's manifesting for a young woman on the spectrum or with a related developmental disability. Would you add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say too, when you were talking about the nonverbal communication and thinking about how these things relate to what we would expect to see in autism, these are some of the areas where you out there might say, oh, well, she makes good eye contact, or it doesn't seem, she was gesturing, or even from a diagnostic perspective. And so to be aware of what we would expect females to do a lot more of that than when we think about that reference group for girls with autism and whether or not it's different or decreased, then we want to think about what we would expect and to understand those kind of typical sex differences or gender differences. And then one of the areas that we know is the most consistent in terms of sex differences in autism is related to that repetitive behaviors and restricted interest across time And so more recent research, though, is talking about these differences.
Oh, and somebody's not muted.
Oh, sorry.
No.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, and so over, more recently, then they've been talking about, well, maybe this looks a little bit different. And so just kind of thinking about that reference group being looking at these individuals with expected sex differences and considering that and what you're seeing in these girls and young women that might have autism.
So if we can go on to the next.
Do you want to talk about the stuff or not? The complexity. You want to talk about this?
Well, that's actually
okay.
what I was going to go to. So okay, thanks for your patience with us as we're navigating. This is my first time navigating an echo, so thanks for your patience with us as well. So when we think about the experience of an adolescent or a young woman with autism or related disability, we have recognized that adolescence is complicated enough. Many of us can remember those times and don't necessarily want to go back there for lots of different kinds of reasons, right? Adding on to that, the additional social complexities of being a female and navigating those more nuanced female kind of normative social expectations. And then the layer of having autism, which then means and kind of goes with the territory that social communication and kind of behavioral expression is going to be more challenging for you, is going to add more complexity. It's not necessarily surprising to us, and probably something that you've all seen with the women and young girls that you're working with, that they're at increased risk for social difficulties and inherently anxiety and depression. And so we've, in some recent literature, when we've examined groups of young women and young men, both with and without autism, young women experiencing autism are at the highest risk for anxiety, depression compared to their male peers with autism and compared to their female peers who do not have autism. So this is a group that we really want to be aware of and want to be thinking about unique ways to address those complex needs. So we want to talk with you a little bit more about that. So one way, and I told you I was going to tell you a little bit about this program where we try to kind of address and support those needs, is through a program called Girls Night Out. And it's a social skills and self-care curriculum that targets the unique needs of girls and young women. What we want you to take away from the things that we do within this program is that we're trying to use evidence-based strategies to what we know so far about what works to focus on strengths and empowerment and building up skills for the young women who are part of this group. Now, we'll acknowledge too, and you may be aware of this, that there's not a lot of research specific to girls and young women. Either we're getting better at understanding a bit about kind of what autism means for young women who have that diagnosis, but we have very little information out there about what we might need to do differently in terms of intervention. So we're doing work actively to better understand that. And this program is one of those kind of initial first steps in attempting to address that. And we do that through a variety of ways that you can see there. But really want to share with you today some empirically based strategies and give you some examples of how we incorporate them in our program and that we think you can incorporate into the practice and the work that you're doing, while also focusing on strengths and empowerment and goal setting and helping girls move forward in the ways that they want to. I want to also point out that we work really hard to establish partnerships with the community. So as you're thinking, I see most of you are sitting there on your own in your office and listening attentively to us, and we really appreciate that. But we also want you to know to be thinking about the other members and providers that you have available to you in your community as partners to continue to build on these skills. So while we acknowledge there's people from lots of different backgrounds, we're hopeful that we can all work together to continue to make this experience more positive for the young women that we all care about. So just briefly, our program structure, so you have a sense of kind of what this looks like when we're implementing it. Not that we're expecting you to go out and implement a program like this today, but just a sense for how these strategies look within what kind of that framework looks like. We typically have a group about 8 to 10 girls, half who have some kind of autism or related disability diagnosis and half who don't. And our core skills group program meets for about 12 weeks, once a week for 2 hours, where we're following this general kind of outline of introducing a skill, practicing a skill together, and then implementing the skill in a community setting where it's supposed to occur. So we try to take what we know from the evidence, put it in place in an authentic setting, incorporate typically developing peers who may be strong models or strong supporters in supporting others in implementing the skill. And the idea is that then the likelihood that you're going to use these skills in the future increases. And we target conversation skills and adaptive skills. So we target kind of understanding how you enter a conversation, how you keep a conversation going, as well as how you then get to know someone, make deeper connections, find common ground, and relate to the person that you're with, the activities you're doing, and the relationship that you're developing. We also target the self-care skill areas that sort of mirror that first slide that we were talking about. So we talk about skin care, body care, hair care, clothing and context, and we talk about fitness and nutrition and sort of how that physical self-care also relates to your emotional self-care. So when we think about how we implement this and the strategies that we use to kind of make this all happen, these strategies are rooted in a few different types of evidence base. So the first area that we focus in on is something called social learning theory. And the idea of social learning theory is that you learn new skills and new behaviors through observing and watching other people doing it. And so then trying to kind of imitate and practice it for yourselves. So a huge way that works for us in GNO, and that we think is a powerful way of being able to practice this in other settings, is to have the opportunity to learn from peers. So we have trained, typically developing peers who participate in the program, where they're sort of coached and supported in how they may be willing to kind of step up and volunteer and try out a new skill, model that skill, and also give us feedback on how that skill might look in being implemented in a natural setting. So if we're talking about conversation skills, our peers are much more authentic and natural practice partners than someone like us who still thinks we're cool, but really we know we're not. So so that's a key component. You can see there we've got some photos on the side because we love to share photos of the amazing young women that we get to meet, but also because it serves as, in some ways, it will serve as examples for you or visual guides for you to see kind of what those supports look like. So some of those visual supports you can see include taking photos of a skill or using a visual model along with written down steps that break down a skill step by step. So in the pictures that you're seeing there and the sort of upper left quadrant of just the picture side, you can see that we're breaking down a hair care skill set that involves making a braid, right? And we've taken pictures of her at various steps in creating the braid, and then we've taken notes. A lot of times we try to have her describe in her own words, what are the steps and what does that feel like to you? Write that down and then print that out and laminate it or share it with her to then take home and be able to practice. So this works for a self-care or adaptive skill, but it also works for other kinds of social skills. So if we're thinking about practicing making making conversation with someone, what does that look like? What are the components of where my face is directed, where my eye contact's directed, how's my body standing, and taking some pictures and breaking that down, as well as then writing down the steps for a young woman. We also incorporate video modeling, which is a similar principle, but using kind of videos for an individual to either model it themselves or watch other people modeling and demonstrating the skill. We also incorporate visual supports that include pictures and diagrams. So you can see in the lower right-hand column, or in the lower right-hand corner of the picture, a visual of Gabby getting ready, Gabby is kind of our go-to kind of virtual support, I would say. Gabby outlines a variety of social concepts as well as self-care concepts. So in this visual, you can see Gabby is providing a model for kind of thinking through what kind of clothing might be appropriate for the context where I'm going to. And not that we're talking about what the latest trend or what the cool thing is, but more about what's practical in the scenario. Where am I going to be at? What am I going to be doing? What's the weather like today? How's my body going to be moving? And what clothing do I choose that presents myself in a way that I feel confident and feel good about, but that also keeps my body covered in the ways that it needs to, so it's not distracting within the context of whatever I'm going to be doing. We also incorporate visual supports in the form of something called a conversations card. So again, we write down some possible conversation ideas, questions you might ask to practice in the setting where it's going to happen. And everyone who's there, peers and participants, use those conversation cards to help facilitate conversation. So it provides kind of a visual prompt and a cue that makes it more likely that girls may be able to use that skill in that setting.
And those individual supports that Dr. Shetler is talking about are housed into a planner that we create for the girls that has some of the tips that are already built in, like Gabby getting ready there. But then when we personalize things as girls go through the program by adding, you know, their individual visual supports, like the hair care example there. And then utilizing these visual supports, you know, outside of the group, but also after they've already practiced and received some successful practice in there with the authentic setting and the people.
So just a few examples of how you might implement or consider implementing a variety of different kinds of kind of real world supports that are based in this evidence base that's also rooted in social learning theory. A couple other types of supports that we utilize and that you might consider working into the framework of your context and where you're at. And we'll look forward to hearing too from you about any cases and ideas about how we might be able to help transfer some of these things to the components of what you're doing. A couple other sort of theory-based strategies that we use are tools rooted in cognitive behavioral theory, or the idea that we learn new things by understanding our emotions and our thoughts and how we're interpreting events and how that then contributes to how we act in an event. So one sort of visual example of how we use that kind of support is through our self-monitoring tools. Which again sort of stem from this goal setting and monitoring approach that's a little bit more rooted in behavioral theory. So for all of the young women that participate in our group and for the young women that I work with in therapy, an early stage in the process is identifying goals that are unique and important to that person, and help them decide together what are some small steps that I can take towards those goals, and what are those steps. What kinds of steps are ones that we might be able to see and measure and count and track for myself and for other people in my life. So in the bottom right hand corner there, the screen, you see an example of what we call our What I Did This Week sheet, but is really a tool for self-monitoring and progress monitoring, where girls track daily, did I do this activity today? And we really do focus on them just checking the box if they did it. It's not a yes or no, it's not a right or wrong. It's how often were you able to do it and how can we stretch you a little bit farther from that baseline level. There's also a place there for parents to review. And so we're very interested in incorporating parents and caregivers as support folks in this process, but that it's also very important that those goals are set by the young women themselves and that it's really an important set of activities and steps that they're going to take for themselves. In addition to this self-monitoring that happens outside of our sessions, we also use specific coaching within our sessions. And so I actually just realized I have these in my pocket here with me, and I don't have a picture of them on the screen, so I'll hold them up here. You can kind of, you don't have to go off of the screen, but okay. We have small tickets that we call GNO bucks. And with those bucks, we also pair specific feedback and coaching. So within those live practice opportunities that we've set up within a session, or that you maybe have set up within a group that you're running, or within a session that you're doing with a group of young women that you may have, or even for other kinds of behaviors that you may want to be encouraging that can often be difficult for many of us to be motivated to do. We all do better if we have a little bit of specific praise or specific feedback. So nice job. Thank you for changing the camera so that everyone can see me. And I give you that genuine, that was a little bit contrived, but we try to give really genuine, authentic, honest feedback where we're telling someone what they do a great job of and pairing that with a buck that then can be acquired over a period of time. You get several of these and you have the opportunity to then shop in our GNO store or purchase items that are valuable and meaningful to the young women that participate in our group. They inform us on a rotating basis what else we need to be stocking. We've stocked the store with all kinds of things. But again, this might be a tool for you in your therapy sessions and your appointments, that it can be helpful to encourage people to do the skills that are needed within that setting if they know that there's a kind of a tangible reinforcer that's attached to that, and the opportunity to get something positive out of, or something that they might see as more positive than whatever we're doing kind of in that session, if that makes sense. So we're all motivated by kind of things that represent other things that we're working for. We all like to work for our paychecks. We like to We might set mini goals for ourselves around exercise or other kinds of behaviors we're trying to get going for ourselves. And so the same principle is true for the young women that we work with in our group and the young women that you're supporting in your practice. So that specific live coaching when we're giving that feedback. And for some people, they may need a little bit of a cue or a little bit of coaching on a skill that they could try using more of. So with many of our girls, we will talk about how, okay, I know in this setting you're trying to ask more questions or add more comments or find out more about this person. So if I see that you're kind of waiting and trying to think of a question to ask, I may whisper in your ear an idea about what to say, or I may encourage you to go and include someone in the group who is out on the edge of the group. So doing just a little bit of that facilitation to help create those opportunities. You won't see facilitators in our groups or in our meetings standing up and telling people what to do the whole time. But what you will see people doing is walking around subtly around the group, whispering in someone's ear, encouraging someone to do something that feels more natural to the context of the group to make it a more positive and kind of safe and supportive environment.
The other piece that's important with this framework is that specific feedback provides a cognitive framework for what it is that you're trying to do. So if you're constantly saying, ask about the other person, or stop talking about what you're interested in, which is we don't do, we differentiate. We really try to focus on highlighting or pointing out the positive skill that they're demonstrating in that natural setting. So when we provide feedback, oh, that was, thanks for asking about her interest. I could tell she's really excited to talk about it. Then that person in the moment says, oh, this is what it means to ask about the person's interest, or, ask a question if someone else is interested in, and then the response that they get. And it's success there, and it's practice in that real environment. So that type of feedback is really informative, not only from the praise perspective, but to really understand what it means to use and demonstrate those skills.
We often talk about making the subtle more obvious. So kind of saying in this, I've said in a situation like, I can see by your body language, your face is frowning, you're hunched over, like, it looks like maybe you're a little bit stressed out. Can you tell me more about that, right? So trying to kind of create that, or even saying, I saw when you did that, that made so-and-so smile, and she seemed to really enjoy that. She liked that feedback. So trying to kind of give that narrative to what's happening in the situation then can help make it more clear and understandable about what's expected and how do I move forward and kind of behaving from here.
And Jessica talked about the peers modeling skills, but it's really modeling using those supports as well. Like you mentioned, that they're going along and doing all those things, and also creating opportunities for people to practice the skills they're working on and to feel success. So we do training with them to think about pausing and allowing more time to go by, because a lot of the girls that we work with need more time to come up with the question. We can sometimes see it physically on their face, they're getting ready to, and then someone chimes in. And so to work with the conversational partner on, all right, give her more time, and then they can ask the question, we provide that specific feedback, and they're successful, and then they can continue that interaction. So and we find like peers very powerful, and so we're using them a lot to encourage people to try new things, or to model using a support we think someone else is going to really benefit from, or to create those opportunities for successful practice.
I would also say that our goal then in terms of growth that we have for peers as well is that we also create more open and accepting peers who then become adults who are more able to be accessible to a variety of members of their community with lots of different kinds of abilities. We also talk about one of the last little boxes on the chart that you're looking at, or that you were looking at, talks about generalization, or this idea that we go and plan and practice, or we plan to go and practice these things in the settings where they occur. And we do that on a pretty regular basis. Within our program, I would say 99% of our sessions happen outside of a clinic setting. So we're trying to practice those skills where those skills would happen. And what happens then is a person feels more comfortable visiting that location again, going back there again, using skills in that kind of setting in the future. But we also provide training and support to the community partner who's hosting the event, which again, we hope has that trickle down effect of that community setting feeling like they're more comfortable and competent to support a variety of people with lots of different kinds of abilities. And so we hope we're having this little tiny like ripple effect and making all of our communities a little more inclusive as well. So.
And the pieces that we really just spent some time talking about, I think, are the most kind of functional in terms of the various settings that you all might be in, thinking about practicing or targeting skills when they're naturally in that authentic setting and across people, and giving that specific feedback to highlight what that individual is doing that you want to see more of, and then utilizing the supports around you, whether it's individuals of a similar age, whether it's coworkers, if you're working with young adults in a work setting, to create those opportunities for success. So I think those are, you can take those, we take them on the road, show on the road everywhere, and I think that's the take-home message too for a lot of you that might be working in various settings, to kind of take those, you know, components and apply them across a bunch of different areas. And
so we've talked to you about what is out there as far as evidence-based strategies, how we implement them, and we can tell you that so far the preliminary evidence that we have from the program is that it's working for our girls. So we see improvements in social communication skills and their self-perception and quality of life. People are generally satisfied with what we're doing, and we've helped make more connections with other community partners and services. And as we're wrapping up, I would leave you with kind of considering this model, and we'll kind of as a framework for what how you're thinking about the kind of supports that you're wanting to develop in the setting where you're working. So one, to think about the strengths and motivations and interests of the young women that you're working with, engaging in some joint goal setting. And I think we heard from our colleagues, I think the first week of our session, about some great strategies for promoting self-determination and in setting a goal, making a plan, and how to approach it. And I think you can see that kind of echoed in this kind of list of strategies within this framework. But to set some goals together, to prepare for how you're going to do that, teach and practice using the supports that we've talked about today, or the support strategies, trying to do that in authentic settings whenever possible, and include a high rate of reinforcement and make it fun. If we're having fun, we kind of forget that we're learning, or that something that seemed hard can seem easier. So not being afraid to sort of have fun with these elements as well, and with this practice, and being strategic in that. And we have sort of our framework there in that triangle that you see, with kind of this idea that we're introducing the skill, we're practicing, reinforcing, building on what you're already doing, and then reinforcing the skill in settings that seem authentic to the skill that we're trying to do. And we kind of have that feedback loop, and the goal is that skills grow and flourish. So, and I think that's our time for the first part of what we're going to do together. Yes.
And then were you guys going to talk about your case? Or?
Yes, we can certainly talk about our case, or if folks want to share a case. We weren't sure.
Came in yet, or...
Yeah. So were there any questions that came in, Sandra, as we were? Okay. Well, I did want to, I don't know if Shanna is still out there, but I didn't know if she wanted to kind of chime in, or if you feel comfortable talking a little bit about your case and any questions when or things that you're encountering, you know, while working with this young woman, that they might be able to give you some ideas about.
I guess I don't necessarily have specific questions. I do think that all of the information so far has been very, very helpful, and will apply not only to her, but a lot of the teenage girls that I do work with. So I think it's been really, really helpful so far. But as far as my case, I don't necessarily have any questions necessarily at this time.
Okay, well, if you think of any, let us know. Does anybody else out there have a specific person in mind that they were like, oh, how would this apply? You know, one of these ideas or strategies. If you want to just like raise your hand or chat in. If not, it's okay. They have an example to talk about, and we can kind of talk through a specific case and maybe how this might be used in that case. Does that sound good?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Do you want to share?
We can, or you can just talk about it.
It doesn't
Yeah.
matter. So we have lots of cases to choose from, but we chose one who is a young adult now, and she is 19 years old. Is that right?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay, 19 years old, but she's been involved with us for a long time, and so we might talk about some of the supports over time that we've implemented. And she is a bright young woman. She has average or above average cognitive abilities. She has a diagnosis of autism, and has some coexisting anxiety that often interferes with her participating in some things or feeling comfortable in situations. She has some repetitive behaviors or restricted interests that are noticeable. So this young woman is bright, but does do some things that look a little bit atypical. So unfortunately, sometimes people probably don't recognize that she's going to have all this great information to share back and forth with her, or recognize her capabilities. She has some sensory interests. You know, she rubs on paper or sometimes sniffs things, and sometimes has some movements that are, typical of, or very apparent in those motor movements that we see in autism. And so she does some of that. And let's see, I'm looking for my notes. She has strengths related to memory. She has an excellent memory. She is a master chess player, I believe, and has had won some awards with that. She has some interests that are pretty intense, but she's done some really positive things with those. One is in dog noses, is what she would say. Mm-hmm. And so she likes to take pictures of dog noses or post them, or, do things like this to people and get a reaction. She's got a great sense of humor, and she likes to joke with people. And so, which sometimes goes well, or sometimes, can be off-putting. And so helping her work with that. There's not a picture up there. Sorry. She really likes origami. So she's great at this and folding of the paper. And she does this, I think, to help with her anxiety and as a sensory input. And she makes these little boats is one of the items that she makes. And then you can close up the boat and put something inside. So something that her family has done, and then we've tried to implement, and the things that we do with her is include that in a social interaction. So she's given those out at events, and it's a conversation starter because there's a little Hershey's Kiss inside. And so it was a Valentine's Day thing. She brought Hershey's Kisses and gave them out to everyone. Mm-hmm. And then people have conversations about, oh, did you make this? And how did you learn to do that? And so she can talk to people about that. But it's also an entry into some situations where she might not be yet comfortable doing that. And she is very interested in making friends, but didn't have a lot of friends outside of school, but she was very engaged in the community. And a lot of that is her family making that a priority. She's involved in Girl Scouts, and
she's a gold level Girl Scout. So she has been dedicated and committed, and is quite accomplished in her Girl Scouting career, I would say, as well.
She had to do 80 plus hours to get this gold award and do a project. And so she selected G&O to work with on our project, and helped us to create G&O Connections, where we're linking girls based on their interest and where they're at in the community. And she helped us create a survey for the girls to complete, and then also a list of activities of what's already going on in the community, so that we can show people, yes, here's all the things that you might want to do based on the interest that you said. So she worked really hard with us on that. And as part of that, went to present with us in Washington, D.C. about the Girls Night Out program and about G&O Connections and her opportunities through a gold award. And I'm going to let us talk a little bit about the strategies that we use to help her be successful at the presentation. But I thought too, maybe before that, I would talk a little bit about her participation in our groups over the years, and some of the strategies that we use to help her be successful in those settings too, because she does, have some compulsions or interest around wanting to know what the other person is eating, or if she has some negative self-talk, and says, you're better than, how come you did better than me today? Or she'll perseverate on, did I blow it? Did I mess up? And she's asking her mom this, she'll be asking this to us, and then she'll be asking the girls in the group or people she's interacting with. So over the years, we've really worked on giving less attention to that, or less response. Maybe you're responding one time and then changing the subject. So that's that differential piece. We build that in with the peers too. So sometimes we'll do this with the girls that we work with. Sometimes we're just not giving that a lot of attention, and we're helping them redirect. But other times we might say, okay, no one is going to talk to you, Hope, about if you're asking them about why they're better than you or what they had to eat. They've already answered you that, and then they're going to switch the subject so that Hope knows what to expect. And then when that's in place, then they can engage in a more kind of meaningful back and forth interaction, and then she experiences some success. And so we would use some of those same strategies with her. Oh, that, thanks for asking about her. You got engaged in something else, and we're not attending to that kind of perseverative negative talk about things. So do you want to talk about when she went to present, or do you want me to talk about that?
You're on a roll. So.
All right, so she went to present with us at this conference in Washington, D.C., and she has presented. She took a speech class this year in her college because she's enrolled. She completed 2 semesters of college already, and so she had to do, I think, 10 or 12 public speaking opportunities. And one of the ways that she helps feel more confident in that is to write out what she's going to say and practice that over and over. And she did that.
And that'd be great for a job interview. I mean,
Yes,
those are things really for anything you're doing.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah. Kind of like that planning ahead of time, helping set up. We gave her the components of here are the expectations and the things that we want you to cover. Tell us what fits in these categories. And then she wrote out what she's going to say and practiced it. We provided her feedback. One of the tools that we used was to give her kind of an advanced a framework where we asked her questions and then she provided the response, and that she had some practice with that so that it's not so open-ended in coming up with a talk or sharing this information. And so we did some back and forth Q&A.
So a lot of the things that would benefit probably everybody in preparing, but we might need to do it even more
Kind of in a
like
more structured
directly
way.
and like practice it more than with another person. In this
Yeah,
conversation.
for sure. And we talked about one of the things that she likes to do is rub this paper, and she often has laminated paper. And so putting the talk or the talking points that you're going to have for an interview or interacting with people onto that piece that maybe isn't typical, but then it becomes a support for you, but still serves that same function of getting the sensory feedback, but yet it has the points that she's talking about on there. Understanding what's coming. Let's see, what else was I going to talk about? So, oh yeah. So so Dr. Bellinger mentioned that we all want to practice and feel good for giving a presentation. We spent some time with her the day before the presentation, going into the room that we were going to be presenting, looking around, having people sit out in the chairs, having her practice with the microphone, having her practice standing up there at the front of her and getting comfortable with all of those pieces so that when she showed up to the presentation, those anxieties were taken away. She just had more of the kind of typical, I'm going to talk in front of people.
And that's a pretty big thing, right? A presentation for anybody, but this could even be used with, even if it's just like you're going to lunch at school, or something that you could go in advance and practice with all the different things that might be happening. So you can, or if you're going to work and maybe going the day before and kind of practicing all the things that might come up. I'm just trying to think about how to generalize that.
So as we're kind of talking about this, I want to bring in a question that kind of fits in line with what you guys are talking about, the environment experience. So Shauna from Great Bend.
Shanna.
I don't want to mispronounce it. But she has, in talking about the young lady that she supports, she says that she has a client and she's relatively higher functioning than her peers, and she's able to engage within her supported housing, school programs, and supported work programs where she can learn the skills, but doesn't often have peers with the same or even better social skills. So most of her modeling comes from professionals, not peers. And so is there any feedback on ideas or ways or strategies that you guys could share with possibly trying to increase her social circle or something?
Yeah, and so it said that, or you said that she is already engaged in activities or settings. She's already part of some social groups or.
She recently transitioned into like a supported housing, like residential program, and she's in the after 18, like the 18 to 21 program in her high school, and she's higher functioning than a lot of the peers that she engages with. So to teach her the necessary skills, I mean, she can learn the skills, but when she gets around her peers, she's the most mature of them, so she doesn't really have a lot of peers to work on those, developing those better skills. And it's with professionals that she's able to be modeled to, but then when she's around her peers, those skills kind of go out the window because they don't serve a purpose for her in those environments.
Yeah. So one of the things that you might think about, and that we do a lot with the girls in our group or individually that we work on, is try to think about, okay, what are they involved in now? And then what are the opportunities for what they might get involved in? And then, so you said, you know, she's in the 18 to 21 program. I'm not sure if there's other pieces of that where they have social outings, or if there's a group of people that get together still every once in a while. You said she's in her, you know, supported living environment. I don't know if she has any interest in whether it's an exercise group or a community center or a church, or, you know, kind of going through, where do you go and what do you do? Who do you see there? And then identifying those places where she has opportunities to build relationships with people. And then thinking about, okay, when you're there, what are you going to do to try and get to know someone, you know, and help. We really have some concrete ways that we help people think through, you know, if Skylar was there and I talked to her, she seemed interesting. And then thinking about, what is Skylar interested in, writing that down. And then, do we have anything in common? And then reviewing that before I go back to that place the next time. Oh yeah, I remember Skylar's husband is, you know, working at the Kaufman Center. I'm going to ask her if she's been to any shows lately. And then, and then that's the relationship building component that we found is really hard for our girls. In fact, we would see it in our peers. Week to week, they were remembering about each other, checking in, and you could getting to know each other better. And a lot of our girls with autism were building some of those conversation entry skills, but not moving to that next level. And so I think the peer practice, you know, in our program, we think the peer practice, it's great because we can create that, but really, I want to create those things in the environments that they're going to be in. We have people come to our program from all these different places, but I want to go to, you know, whether it's the place, the house that she's in, the 18 to 21, the social part, the church group, all those things, and help you know, plan and goal set and work through these things and reinforce them in those authentic settings.
And I would say, to go along with, what's she like to do? What is she interested in? What's fun for her? And where can she have the opportunity to talk about that thing she's interested in, that thing she likes to do with somebody else who likes it too? And that makes it, you know, more likely that she might feel more comfortable or want to engage in more of those skills in that setting.
Yes, I think it's, you know, when we think about skill building and teaching, I really think about that as inclusive within where you're going to do it, as opposed to, you know, teaching her skills and she needs more people. It's about being successful in the environment that you're in, and then trying to figure out how to apply that into those multiple settings, and probably picking some pretty important ones. And so if she's in a living situation right now that, you know, and getting along with roommates or meeting people, I know that 18 to 21 program, some schools I've heard, they separate you, so you see them out of high school and you don't go to the events, and other schools, they can still go to the events. I know I had a parent advocate several years ago that their daughter, that the people in the 1821 program still got student IDs and could go to the football games, basketball games, and events, because you know, all of a sudden they were not doing that anymore, and it just took their already small social circle and just chopped it and made it more difficult, because school, at least, or being in, the more the people are involved in things, the more opportunities they have to, you know, meet someone they're interested in and get to know them better and have more social opportunities.
And I wonder too if she could do some kind of a she could sort of maybe lead a group, or I mean, you know, like if you, with some of the girls that are in her living or her other program of not necessarily, but you know, you guys talk about a skill and then she helps teach them and then they practice it. I mean, just to kind of let the trickle effect go out to everybody, even though they may not be at her level, you could still be working on something.
Confidence with the skills.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we talked about in our Geno Connections group is to think about what are those natural reoccurring social opportunities that people create. People have book clubs, people have lunch groups and a dinner club, and that rotates every month. And so helping her think about being a leader in getting the ball rolling on some of those things could be good too, because I mean, those are all, or people have, I don't know if people do it anymore, the game where you play dice.
Bunko.
Yeah, just thinking about, okay, well, what are other, I mean, that's the question that we always ask. What are other people her age and in those settings doing? and how can you get her?
May not be bunko. But I don't
May
know.
not be bunko. Probably not a thing anymore.
And we are getting close to running out of time. I wanted to remind you that our expert panel is going to stick around for a little while after 1 if there are some burning questions or some things that you wanted to discuss. But otherwise, I think that's a good place to wrap up. We really appreciate everybody tuning in and joining us today and contributing questions and experiences. And I felt like we had some really good discussion. So again, thanks for coming. Please, again, fill out your evaluations when that link is sent, and please join us next week. I think we have 2 more, and the next couple of weeks we're going to focus on sexuality for adolescents and adults with developmental disabilities, and also healthcare and kind of making a medical home and that transition to, family practice away from pediatrics and all the things that go into that. So we have some really exciting speakers and presenters lined up for you for the next couple of weeks.
And do they get these slides or not?
Oh, they do. We can share the slides.
Okay, because I was going to say there's a few slides that you'll get then if it's part of the presentation that have some more information about how we've expanded the model over the last 10 years. And, I know we talked about this, a sliver of our skills groups today, but really what we know is that we want to be creating opportunities and building social supports across the lifespan. And so we are expanding programming, and we have opportunities for ongoing social interactions. And then we also have some aims and targets related to training other people in the model. And
right, yeah. So I think that if you're really interested in this and excited about it, which is really exciting, I know that Jess and Renee and Mallory would be more than willing to talk with you about sharing probably the resources. And
so in that packet of slides that you get is on one of the final slides includes all of our names and email addresses so that you could reach out to us with any further questions.
Because that's what I was wondering, with even just like the little visuals, would that be something that we could share out, or would that be something they would contact you to get?
On our website there's some information, and then we have our first training program to become like a certified facilitator is in the fall, and we're trying to get people on the list for future trainings. And so that's one. And then we are finalizing the manual that we would be able to share with people either that come to that training or outside, an outside publisher. And then there's some supports that if we had some targeted questions that we could probably, connect you or walk you through some of those pieces.
Great. And we'll be sending out that website and those slides as well. I hope everybody got those follow-up resources from Chandra last week.
Right.
Okay. Well, again, we're gonna end our official time, but we're gonna stick around. So please feel free to either shout out a question or kind of chat in a question if you can think of something else you'd like to talk about or ask about while we have them here. Is there anything that's coming to mind or coming up on the chat box?
Nothing yet.
I would also just add, as I see different folks who are participating, we have some people even on the call that have been past or current facilitators who've been a huge help with implementing these supports. And so I'll just say again, to remember that you don't feel like you have to be doing all this on your own or creating all of this stuff by yourself. You can certainly reach out to us for support, but also think about the other folks you have on your team or other providers in your community, in your area, who might have expertise to share, who might be doing groups or providing supports to folks in the community, and think about how you can bring what you've learned now from this kind of gender lens to the work that you're doing, that they're already doing, and hopefully magical things will happen. I'm sure they will.
Anything else? Last questions.
I can see the potential for, I think it's a great idea, the Girls' Night Out, and I'm glad that you'll be able to be training facilitators and making the materials available. And I work mostly with adults, but I can see the potential for this group in adult women as well, having mentors and conversations and outings and things like that. So I'm excited to spread the word and see what we can do.
Yeah, that would be great.
Thanks, Angie.
Yes.
And isn't there a program? Is it like that house that is for adult women? Is that?
Yeah, so in New York, there's something called the Felicity House, and it's pretty unique. We haven't seen any like it, and it's part of our big goals to have a space, this gathering space here at some point too. And women don't live there, but it's just a gathering space, and they hold events, interest groups, speakers, painting class, and then they have these kind of what do they call them? Circles, where it's people that are starting to connect people who might have similar interests. It's grown over time, and it's driven by the women with autism and their ideas and interests and kind of what they want to do. Just more of ongoing social supports.
So even creating something kind of informal like that in Dodge City or something, that would be kind of cool.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can help you dream big. We got.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah. Hmm.
Anything else before we close up? Okay, nothing's coming through on there. All right, well, thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll be sending out all those resources. Hey, want to say bye?
Yeah, thank you guys so much. It was a pleasure to be with you guys.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.